I shall start this seminar by making tribute to Tommaso Pagliascioppa, who is not with us. He was foreseen to be here as one of the people participating to our seminar, and I think that we lost with him a great European, one of the founding fathers of the Euro, and somebody as President of Notre Europe was still very active in this debate on the finances of the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, as you have seen, we have foreseen two panels today. One, and I want to thank immediately Mr. Lewandowski, the Commissioner for the Budget, to be here. One on analyze the community budget of today. We think that the financing system of the Union of today is on its last legs, and the question is how to reform it. And for that we have not only Mr. Lewandowski but also Mr. Daniel Groos, who is the director of the Center of European Policy Studies. Thank you, Mr. Groos. And then we have a second panel. The second panel is a little bit, what could Eurobonds mean for this budget in the future? Why not using bonds to finance investment? What is now done with current expenditures in the Union? That was something that has been refused to Jacques Delors, I think, 20 years ago. But with all the difficulties that we have today, that we are facing today on the national level, it's an idea that is coming back with a great speed, and I think that Paul de Grauwe from the KUL and Dominique de Graillancourt from the EEB can give some ideas how Eurobonds can help to finance growth in Europe without making it more difficult for the community budget. So that's the basic idea. Now, before giving the floor to Karel, because as you know, Karel is leading the ALDE group in the SURE committee. SURE committee, as you all know, is the committee in the Parliament who is dealing with the financial perspectives for 2014-2020. We have something special. That is a video message of 11 minutes of Harry Notenboom. So maybe many people in the room don't know who Harry Notenboom is, but all the MEPs, Mr. Lewandowski, of the Liberal group know who Mr. Harry Notenboom is. Not because he is a Liberal, because he is not. He's from the Christian Democratic Party, but because he is the former rapporteur on own resources of the European Parliament between 1971 and 1984. And he is the last to really know what own resources means in the European Union, I think. And he sent it us, that was in 2000, no, Okian Mulder knows it. He sent it us in 2009, a paper of 30 pages on the history of the own resources. And that is basic knowledge for the ALDE group. So first of all, if you want to come in the ALDE group, you have to know what is in this paper of, that's like a professor, Professor de Grauwe, it's your entry in the group. That's to know what is in this paper of Harry Notenboom. Unfortunately, he could not be here. He's 84 years old, but nevertheless, he's still in a good health. And he has made a message for us where he described his experience with the own resources in his political life and what he thinks about what happened since he left the battlefield of the budgetary policy of the European Union. So if everything is ready now, we should hear Harry Notenboom, and after that it's Karel who is taking the chair of this meeting.
Meneer de voorzitter, geachte leden van de ALDE-fractie en andere toehoorders.
Chairman,
Op verzoek van de heer Verhofstadt zal mijn bijdrage aan uw seminar handelen over de geschiedenis van het eigen middelenstelsel van de Europese Unie. Ik zal globaal vanaf het begin deze financiering schetsen en daarbij sommige punten benadrukken die u misschien kunt gebruiken bij de besluitvorming waar u binnenkort voor staat.
Beginnings of this financial system, and emphasize some points that may be useful for you as you take the decision that lies ahead of you. The direction that you choose for the period of the future, it may be helpful to understand how the financial system has developed up until today. So we have to begin in 1951 with the ECSC. It was the beginning of the adventure of supranational European cooperation. The ECSC budget was funded with its own resources. That's to say, levies on coal and steel products. The High Authority, which became the European Commission, sent bills to coal mines and steel plants, but it had to provide leadership for this whole sector. So the bills did not go via the national authorities. The ECSC had to have financial autonomy. How was the European Economic Community set up by the Treaty of Rome in 1957 to be financed? It was to cover the whole economy. And so for the EEC2, the Treaty of Rome envisaged financial autonomy. The treaty stipulated that the Commission must study under what conditions the provisional national amounts could be replaced by own resources. The treaty mentioned resources deriving from the common customs tariff when that came into force. Thanks to a tough struggle between the Commission and the European Parliament on one side and the Council of Ministers, on the 21st of April 1970, the first Council decision on own resources was finally passed. That replaced the national contributions by own European resources. Three types of resources were mentioned: the common customs tariff, the agricultural levies, and, I quote, income from value-added tax deriving from a percentage that may not exceed 1% of a base which will be established on a uniform basis by the member states, end quote. The introduction of VAT in the member states had already been prescribed by the EEC, and the sixth VAT directive brought in sufficient harmony in the base to ensure that the levies could be directly replaced. It was decided that there wouldn't be a European customs service as such, or a European VAT service. Rather, the member states would levy these amounts and transfer them directly to the Commission. For the cost of collecting these amounts, the member states received a 10% rebate. Because of delays with adapting national VAT to the sixth directive, the whole EEC budget was only financed by own resources in 1980. There's often a misunderstanding about VAT, which I must lay. Many people, even prominent ones, think that the European percentage of VAT is actually a percentage of VAT revenue, but rather it's a percentage of the VAT base, which has therefore been harmonized. So if a national tax rate is 19%, Europe gets 0.9%, and that leaves 18.1% for the member state. If a particular tax is at 6%, then that same level of 0.9% goes to Europe, and 5.1% remains for the member state. The European percentage, therefore, is independent of the rate set, which has remained a national competence. In 1973, the United Kingdom joined the EEC. In a transitional phase, own resources from the accession states were only gradually transferred to Brussels. Following that transitional period, the United Kingdom felt a tension between what it was contributing to the EEC and what it received in return. The UK had a fairly small agricultural sector and it didn't have a particularly large GDP. By way of compensation, the country received extra financial help for transport infrastructure from the EEC budget. But Mrs. Thatcher, the Prime Minister, thought that that was not enough and demanded her money back from Brussels. It wasn't actually her money, because these amounts had been made over as EEC own resources. But she took her demands very far. The Commission and the European Parliament, however, worked to ensure that the own resource system could be properly respected. But at a European summit meeting, Mrs. Thatcher threatened to leave if she was not given satisfaction. And just as she was about to leave the room, a certain degree of understanding was forthcoming, so she did remain at the meeting. The President of the European Parliament called that attitude blackmail. After a number of years of struggle and seeking for a solution, in 1985, the second decision on own resources came into being, whereby the United Kingdom was given a rebate on its VAT contribution, to the expense of all the other member states except Germany, which only had to contribute 2/3 of that correction. Transparency was seriously damaged by this, and not just for a couple of years. That lack of transparency still persists today. The British compensation and the reduction of Germany's contribution was thus carried out not via the expenditure side, but by means of diversifying the VAT percentage, the revenue side, in other words. This has led to people thinking in terms of a fair return in other member states too. That's the kind of thinking, to put it in real terms. What we pay Europe and what we get back. But this doesn't reflect the advantages that an EU member state enjoys. The attack on transparency in what is, after all, a very complex system has never been put good. The member states refused to allow VAT to be increased beyond 1.4%. It was less for the UK and Germany. And we therefore ended up with a fourth own resource, a percentage of GDP. Now, in legislation, this was called an own resource, but in practice it looked more and more like a contribution. All the more so, given that the member states at the end of the day had gone over to a system where they were actually putting the notional own resources into the national budgets and only thereafter transferring those amounts to Brussels. The Commission and Parliament were unable to prevent that. New member states joined who were unaware of the original intention and legal texts. The Commission refused to take on this fair return school of thought, but eventually had to abandon that struggle. At the beginning of the 90s, the CAP changed, and the Netherlands, above all, received lower agricultural subsidies from Europe. A political leader started to call, "We're paying too much to Europe." That influenced the outcome of the referendum on the Constitutional Treaty of the European Union, with the Netherlands unexpectedly voting against. In Germany, the concept of a net contributor was circulating, but the Commission continued to fight that sort of thinking. After that referendum, there was no stopping the Dutch finance minister attacking the heart of the system of own resources. Customs duties, he said, should no longer go to Europe, nor should that share of VAT. Now, that didn't actually happen completely, but in the European Council, there was a significant correction made to the existing own resources, which for the most part were made up of a share of GDP. The complaining states, Germany and Sweden, as well as the Netherlands, benefited from these corrections. Those three countries can pay a lower amount of VAT. The annual GDP contributions from the Netherlands and Sweden were decreased by a lump sum. And by means of the detailed calculations, it was ensured that the United Kingdom would continue to receive its rebate, together with a lower contribution to the funding of the reduction for Germany, Austria, Sweden and the Netherlands. That's how the 6th decision on own resources came into force in 2007. The history of own resources, unfortunately, has become a soap opera. It's worse than that, in fact. It's a lie, because everyone involved, and also the legal texts involved, still talk about own resources, whereas, in fact, there's no such thing anymore. There's no real basic concept behind this. It's become a non-system. The rules and figures are the outcome of compromise after compromise, of a lack of vision and of blackmail. And yet the decisions on own resources have been ratified by all the member state parliaments. They are complicit in this, therefore. The task now lies before you to judge the European Commission's proposals, which will be forthcoming this year, and to bring an end to this chaos. I will have to leave it here, but I want to add 2 things. Whatever financial system is found, resources must not be national, because then there'll be competition between European resources and education, police, social services, and so forth. Lastly, the share of VAT has the advantage of ensuring that consumers are personally involved, and this is a way of giving them the feeling that they've funded Europe. The consumers are the same people who vote for the European Parliament and can therefore develop European democracy further. Whatever you choose, European citizens must understand you. Thank you for your kind attention.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, also on my behalf, welcome to the seminar. I'm happy that so many of us has found the time to be here today. After thanking Mr. Notenboom for his intervention that the modern technique provided us in this way, we were going to have now 2 very interesting interventions. First, we have Commissioner Lewandowski and then Mr. Daniel Gross. And we're going to start out by Commissioner Janusz Lewandowski, who's our budget commissioner and also has the background as a member of our parliament and a minister of the Polish government, member of the Polish parliament, etc. And Mr. Lewandowski has the interesting task of working with this very topic during the spring, so we're very much looking forward to all the interesting proposals from the Commission, and we're hoping to get some of those maybe already today. Mr. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your invitation, President Verhofstadt. Thank you, Mr. Haglund. All the best wishes for the new year, interesting year. Also my best wishes to all sorts of creditors and bondholders around Europe for 2011. I think this is a good time to discuss the future, although the future is now so strongly overshadowed by the present. And the present is, in its spirit and its climate, is not resembling the time of activity of Mr. Harry Notenboom. Neither this time nor the late 90s, when the old continent was a sort of new brave world ready for reunification after the reunification of Germany, and really with very optimistic spirit. We have the very fresh memory of the last budgetary negotiations. That was a fiasco of the conciliation, first one since 1984, and something to be remembered. Of course, I feel very much relieved that we have the final agreement, but I do remember all that was reflected in the negotiations, that is reflecting nowadays the climate of Europe. I think that just to make a small digression, because this is so fresh in our memory, I think the strategy of the Parliament to go for politics, for real stake in negotiations over the future, was the right one. However, being right one, immediately was opposed very strongly, especially by several governments. It is important to remember that 23 were ready to somehow accommodate the political wishes of the Parliament. In the final end, I think this was good to have a budget, not go further as it is difficult then to explain to the beneficiaries around Europe the very complex interinstitutional matters. And there are several leftovers for this year, very important. There are commitments by Prime Minister Leterme, by Barroso, as to how the rotating presidencies and the Commission could accommodate some of the political legitimate demands of the Parliament. That is very important. I have to tell it to the Parliament that we need for the future the body that is thinking in terms of community spirit. At the end of this financial perspective, payments should grow. That is in the nature. That is in the nature. However, it is not quite understood by many member states, but we have obligations and we have to pay. That is the credibility of the European budget. Therefore, the Parliament is very much needed in these negotiations over 2012 and 2013. But today we are about financing in the future. As you know, this is a very delicate, very complex issue. It is enough to remember that a lot of attempts were failed in the past, very short-lived attempts to modernize the system or to reform the system, practically no real formal proposal on how to reform, how to implement own resources, genuine own resources has been introduced since 1988, and this is like a warning. This is going to be difficult exercise. And what I mean by really discussing the future is, of course, bundling the sources of revenue for the European budget with what is now a part of the game, that is correction mechanism, very complex one, and partly already discussed by Mr. Nottenboom, and also the expenditure side. We cannot deal with this issue separately because this is the road to fiasco. We should have a political, wise political way of bundling sources of revenue, correction mechanism that is in place and should be displaced or reformed, and expenditure side, because everything is resulting then in the net position of the member states, and in order to have the deal over the future, we need 27 yes. That is that simple as a wisdom behind the budgetary negotiations, including what is to be discussed in the second round of your seminar, that is the innovative financial instruments. Euro project bonds are the part of the scheme to leverage the European budget, to find the way to fill the financing gap in the Europe that is existing in infrastructure, in energy, and in transport via innovative financial instruments, not only via so-called Euro project bonds. On purpose, I am not using the wording of the Euro bonds because it is immediately provoking resistance in some member states. So we are about investment project bonds, or 2020 strategy investment project bonds, that should be a part of this package to be presented and to find the decent way of financing the future of the European Union. You know, and this was also the part of a story we've heard a few minutes ago, that the previous attempts to modernize, to reform the system were rather short-lived and not discouraged by what was, for example, in 2004. This was the European Parliament in the last mandate to try. That was the responsibility of the rapporteur and now the chairman of the budgetary committee, Mr. Alain Lamassoure. He knows what I know, and you probably know the warning that was explicitly expressed by as early as 1787 by Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers of the United States, that the sort of federal structure cannot live out of the contributions only of the member states, and should collect, if it is to be durable, its own resources to survive. That was the wisdom. I can quote that requisitions upon the states have inevitable tendency to enfeeble the union and sow the seeds of discord and contention between the federal head and its members and between the members themselves. We are not the federal state of Europe, but for the lasting structures, the wisdom is more or less the same. And I can agree with my predecessor, with the former speaker, that really the complex system existing now is one of the reasons for the tension, increased tension in the 21st century and increased difficulty to get the agreement over the budget, not only annual budget, but also the multi-annual financial frameworks. What is now a correction mechanism has been progressively introduced, making it even more complex, and this is one of the symptoms of the existing problem. This is so easy to find and detect all sorts of flaws in the system, but this was partly done. I don't need to repeat what is bad about the existing system, but criticizing, and here is again the political wisdom, but criticizing the existing system is not automatically not paving the way towards the new one, because this is going to be extremely complex exercise. As I have tested on my own in August, taking advantage of the summer break, to test the climate around potential new own resources before coming with so-called budgetary review and several proposals. The test was clearly indicated that official responses are rather negative in the member states, although unofficially, in many of them, in many capitals, I could hear afterwards that we should find something enabling member states to consolidate the public finances. So there was this dual way of responding officially and inviting unofficially to find the way, relieving national contributions and making the life of finance ministers throughout Europe a little bit easier in their job to consolidate their national finances. Then we have after testing individually on my own, we had the budgetary review, and budgetary review had some very clear points on the issue of financing the future of the European Union. Number one, rather clear, is that we should get rid of non-genuine VAT. This is only complicating the system. The 40 years of debates, really, I know the date, and this is more than 40 years of the debates over VAT system, are really about complications, and this is not coming closer to the genuine own resources dependent upon VAT. So this is the point number one, clearly stated in the budgetary review. We should simplify the system at least, and the VAT as it is existing now is not the way towards the simplification. Then the point number two is that we have to make the choice coming with our communication on the next multi-annual framework. This is an important statement. Now we are at a very convenient stage of having the list. Out of a longer list, we have presented the list of 6 candidates, but still we are at the safer side of the discussion because nobody knows what would be the final selection. But the promise is, sincere promise, to come with a choice. And then it starts. Here is the difficulty, to jump from the list of candidates, which with so many responses from many areas of Europe, with fortunately positive response from the European Parliament, and take the risk of selecting 1 or 2 own resources and include them formally into the formal communication on the future post-2013. That has never happened since 1988. and the discussions were not so formal, no formal applications so far, but we are to take the risk, and I am to disappoint you. I am not going today to enumerate, to pick the winners. I know that all of them are not perfect. That is what I can tell today. But it's easy to evade real discussion by enumerating the criteria. What should be the quality of potential own resources? They should be, for example, they should be autonomous in the way that they not necessarily should be transmitted via the member states. Could go directly. This is one of the criteria, very important, but it is immediately provoking the Eurosceptic public opinion that we are abusing our taxation prerogatives. Nothing of that. Any sort of taxation decision has to be ratified by the national parliaments, and we have no power to raise taxes. But one of the criteria, one among the criteria, is that it should be autonomous, not necessarily going via the member states to the Brussels. The second criteria for selection, the winners in this competition, is that it should be cross-border in its nature. It should be more difficult to raise at the national level than at the European level. Its tax base should be mobile, moving across the border, therefore making it difficult for the national finance minister to grasp, simply. And next, it should be rather linked to the acquis that is somehow being in line with the advantages of the single market. If it is to be admissible and realistic, is that it should be judged from the point of view of the impact upon the member states, upon the sectors of the industry. We cannot simply allow ourselves to make any proposal that is detrimental to growth and jobs, really, given the conditions of the contemporary Europe. The list of 6 candidates is presented in the budgetary review. 3 of them were already discussed at the level of discussion, of course, by Mrs. Schreier in 2004, that is the resources based on VAT, on energy and corporate profits. I'm not going now to bother you with, to occupy you with my presentation and pros and cons of the 6. What is really important to know is that nobody's perfect, really. I know that there are deficiencies in all these, in the list. This is non-exclusive list. Visibility for example, VAT or corporate taxation as a percentage of VAT or corporate taxation was a sort of quality several years ago, but now visibility, that is contribution of a citizen to the Brussels, could be seen as a disadvantage. We are in different spirit nowadays. Resources like, for example, revenues from the emission trading system that is in place since 2005 are already partly allocated. So in order to generate more, we should change the decision of a council. And we should know what is the geographical balance of any sort of taxation or any sort of own resources. I'm trying not to use the word taxation because this is about genuine own resources, and any of the candidates has clear impact upon the position of a member state. If we are about financial sector, either financial activity, that is, or transaction, rather activity than transaction, rather corporate type than activity type own resources, that is easily to guess who is immediately being provoked, as 90% of the industry is concentrated in Great Britain and in Germany. If we are about energy or CO2 emission schemes, this is easily also to detect the countries which are mostly affected in this case. So everything of that sort should be judged before coming with a proposal, but I have to state it officially. we are coming with a proposal and not the list of candidates latest in June 2011. That is the end of Hungarian presidency passing to the Polish presidency. And we know that this is not the gift to the Polish presidency to start discussion over the future, including their own resources. What is extremely important, and this is my final part, is the communication. We have lost the battle on words, over European Union and its perception, and especially about the European budget. European budget is seen as a Eurocrat's budget, although the administrative costs in proportion to the total are quite modest. That is 5%, 5.8%. Therefore, 94 is going to the beneficiaries in 27 countries. This is seen as growing budget, although the statistics are clearly showing that since 2000, the European budget has grown by 37%, despite enlargement by 12 countries. And the national budgets of the European Union have grown by more than 60% without enlargement of the member states. Therefore, I attach a great importance now to regain the territory of words, of perception. Otherwise, we are lost, whatever the quality of the proposals. And the time will be out. In June, we have to present, and now we are at the more convenient stage of discussion and not judging the final proposal. So thank you for invitation once more and for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for your presentation and for being here and for your innovative and new thinking. I know many of you already want to put questions to the Commissioner. Before that, we're going to hear our next speaker, and then we're going to have a discussion where MEPs and others are able to put questions and to comment. And then after that, we're going to have another panel. So our next speaker is the Director for the Center for European Policy Studies, Mr. Daniel Gross, who has a background in the IMF and also as an advisor to the Union and several European and other governments. And he's also written interesting publications on various topics, and amongst them on European taxation. So, Mr. Gross, the floor is yours.
Yeah, although these days there are other topics which appear to be, say, more sexy or perceived to be more relevant for policymakers. It's a pleasure to be here, and I was going to say, as a non-expert in the budget, especially the presentation by Harry Notenboom, which we just heard, was revealing, for me at least, to the extent that that many of the ideas which come up again and again were already there at the beginning and were then somehow, say, distorted in the political process. I don't think that's a reason for rejecting them. I think maybe they were good, but the time maybe is now ripe to go back to them, for the simple reason, as was pointed out earlier, that the present system is so complex that even those who contribute to its constitution now have to admit that maybe a radical cut is necessary. And in a sense, what I would propose is go back to something, as Harry explained, that was there as an idea at the very beginning, namely to have a real, quote-unquote, own resource in the form of a VAT contribution, but not the way which is done right now, as he explained in great detail, but in the original context, which would simply be a European percentage that would be applied by member countries and then transferred not first to the national budgets and then to Brussels, but in the way that he explained it was the idea at the very beginning, that whenever somebody buys something and he gets a VAT receipt, it would say VAT 19%, national 1% EU, or 12 or 6, right? But 1% for the EU. 1% for the EU. Maybe it's also much easier to do that today with all the computer systems that we have than it might have been in the past. As Commissioner Lewandowski just said, in the end, the decision is now really one between several imperfect candidates. And therefore, I don't want to talk a lot about the advantages of a VAT system, but a bit more about what I perceive to be the disadvantages of the competitors, so to speak. The first one is, of course, the question of green taxation. For example, the revenues from the European emissions trading system could be affected to the EU budget. Commission already explained that, of course, that has obvious imbalances among member states. I would add to that that it is very much subject to fluctuations in line with the market price for emissions, which we really don't know where it will be going. It could crash, but we hope it will go up, but we're not sure. This is something we cannot control. And I would always warn to have a budget depend to a very large extent on a very unstable tax base. Imagine if that price just in the market goes from, whatever, 11 euros to 20, your revenues double, and the next year they go down by 1/2. I don't think that's the way to do some long-term planning, especially not at the European level. So that is, for me, an additional reason why I would not take that source. Then what is often mentioned is either taxation on capital, or in particular taxation on corporate profits. I would argue that they share especially this last problem. They are both very cyclical. And especially in the last recession, we have seen that corporate taxable profits, let me call it at least that way, are subject to very large swings from one year to the next. And they're very much linked to the business cycle. This again would have the, relying on this sort of tax base, would have the consequence of making the tax revenue of the EU extremely pro-cyclical. And that's not exactly what we want. We want to have something that is relatively stable, ideally, of course, counter-cyclical, but that's very difficult to achieve with tax revenues. And therefore, I think one is forced to come back to the idea of part in the VAT. As explained, I think already today, it should be quite clear. This is not something which should go first into the budget of member states and then to Brussels as a contribution, but it should be directly paid towards Brussels in the same way as in Germany, for example, the Länder level collects the taxes for the federal level and gets a cut, that's okay, but still, it doesn't enter the budgets of the Länders first and then goes to the federal level. And even as we now know, if you have a rate of only 1%, we would already be able to cover a large part of the existing budget. We also know that it would be very close to the present distribution of resources, basically because in almost all member countries, consumption is a very large part of GDP, and over the business cycle, these rates are very similar. And maybe in some countries, consumption is a bit smaller than in other countries, but maybe that is what we want to achieve in taxation in general. We don't want to tax in the first instance revenue, but perhaps more what people are consuming. And that is what we achieve with the VAT rate, which I therefore would consider to be the prime suspect, which hopefully comes out on top of your list, which you will disclose in July. Let me add one point, which is perhaps completely off the topic today, but potentially very important. If we get a European public prosecutor who is supposed to look after the financial interests of the EU, then if the EU takes a part of the VAT revenues in the way I just described, Then, of course, that would be a way by which one would have a very strong federal, say, surveillance element of the various VAT administrations, and would have a direct way to combat VAT fraud, which we know is a very big business in the EU, which right now is dealt with by member countries with a very varying degree of efficiency and intensity. But with the VAT, one would have to, so to speak, a Trojan horse in there, which could be used to deal with this kind of phenomenon, which is extremely important at the EU level, not just in terms of lost revenues for member countries, but for me, more importantly, in the extension of corruption and malfeasance which it allows. With this, I would rest the case, and you have more time for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Gross. Now we have heard two of our speakers here, plus Mr. Notenboom, and now we're open for discussion on the topic. We'll start with Mr. Duff.
Good afternoon, and thank you to our three speakers, in fact, for their most interesting presentations. I'm puzzled about the process of reform. I think that the title of this session is quite correct, because it asks, what are we going to do to approach the reform? Is just how are we going to break down the prejudice, to dispel the ignorance that was extremely dramatically exposed in August when Commissioner Lewandowski flew his kite on summer holidays. He was, I mean, I recall now the outcry in the British press, and of course their knives are now sharpened, and there has been a proposal from Mr. Lamassoure and others that we establish a sort of an interparliamentary conference. One can't call this a convention because that would frighten the horses, but something that would be akin to an interparliamentary conference that would bring the national treasury committees and the relevant committees of this parliament and the commission to discuss the common problem in the same place at the same time seems to me to be an attractive option. And I would be very interested to know, especially from the Commissioner, if he has been sounding, if he's made soundings on the feasibility of such an approach. And I think it's an attractive option for the party groups here in this parliament, because if there seems to me to be now two orbits of politics inside the EU. There's the federal one and there's the national one. Sometimes we interconnect by accident rather than by design. But to gear the party politics at the EU level to the party politics at the national level requires an intense effort by the party political forces, including the liberals, to achieve coherence and cogency. And an exercise on the budget, both expenditure and revenue, could be an extremely fruitful vehicle for building a respectable party political approach to this matter, to assist the states to broker the deal. They can't do it by themselves. It's quite clear that the council on this is going to be paralyzed, and they will require the influence of party politics and the pressure from outside, indeed, too, from stakeholders, if the circle is to be squared.
Thank you, Andrew. Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Gross, comments? Commissioner will start maybe.
Thank you. VAT was nominated. The winner is, yes. But let us wait. Of course, I'm conscious of the qualities of the candidate out of this short list. Really, this is very affluent source. Even 1 or 2% that is enough to make what is needed, that is to relieve the national contributions. And that is relatively easy to collect because the machinery is in existence. It should be invoice clearly indicating that this 1% is for European Union. So from that point of view, many qualities. But on the other hand, as nobody is perfect, you know, Professor Gross, that this is not fully harmonized. There are even zero rates for many products throughout European Union, and this is regressive in its nature. Regressive means that probably the poorer nations and poorer citizens could complain. This is not progressive type of taxation. This is regressive type of taxation, therefore affecting proportionally more poorer than the so-called rich. And visibility, which was normally indicated as a quality, as what we should attempt at, this link between citizens and Brussels, it's no longer a quality. This is very visible type of taxation in relation, for example, to the sectoral taxation as aviation or revenues from the emissions trading system. But of course, this is a serious candidate, and as was promised to make the choice, we have to judge all the pros and cons in this respect. I can only agree with Mr. Duff. That is no surprise that communication problem and political problem is the major one, which was blocking really the reform of own resources for many, many years. How to find the way out of a deadlock, out of a prejudice, I have no clear recipes now, because now I am estimating the climate in a rather pessimistic mood. Crisis is normally provoking more egoistic reactions, and that is for many national politicians so easy to blame Brussels. That is the way of discounting popularity at home. Normally, European Parliament is a real partner in this exercise. But European Parliament, on the occasion of 2011, was ready to go for own resources and immediately provoking very strong reaction from the member states, seeing it as a very fiscal domain. So we should be very delicate in arranging political events that could be seen as onslaught on fiscal sovereignty of the member states. Very delicate issue, and my personal experience is enough to know that. But I can only agree, communication, politics, and not just techniques and legal side of the issue matter.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Gras?
Just one point on the supposed regressivity of VAT, which I don't think is really an issue. If you do the numbers and even take into account the zero rating, then you see that the regressivity is close to zero, basically. And there are so many exceptions to that rule that you find some countries would pay a little bit more, We're talking really about very marginal changes here. It would be perhaps, instead of paying X% of GDP, it would be X plus 5 percentage points more, 5 percentage points less. So it would be extremely marginal change from the present system. And I can assure you that even if perhaps on average it would be slightly regressive, de facto there would be many other cases. So I don't think regressivity should be the main point of view.
Thank you. before giving the floor to the next MEP, allow me to remind you, first of all, that we do have translation, so if you want to speak in any of the languages available, it's possible. And let me also remind the people present that now have a long list of speakers of MEPs, but also others than the MEPs are, of course, welcome to put questions and comments to the seminar, so feel free. The next speaker is Mrs. Jensen, who happens to be also the Vice President of our SURE committee. Anne, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much for the presentations. I'm one of the VAT enthusiasts also, and I think you have put a very good case for it, specifically Mr. Gross, and I think the last remarks were very interesting. But of course, I'd like to hear if there's any sort of hesitance on the side of the Commissioner, apart from the fact that it's difficult to make change, whether there are certain arguments. I heard chosen instead of going to the VAT, apart from the technical issue of not being able to do it the right way back in the 80s and early 90s, then it was that the poorer countries would be affected more than the richer countries. So there might be some case in point, but I'd like to hear about that. I also think sometimes the devil is in the detail, and I've got a little example. I've been approached by people from the busing sector. When you drive a bus through Europe, you pay VAT, and when you drive through Germany, you pay German VAT. When you drive through Belgium, you pay Belgian VAT, and it's a rather delicate exercise and a huge bureaucracy to find out how to pay these things. And what they're actually calling on is a VAT, European VAT on transport. They say that would make life easier for business. So you might even find sources where people out there would say this is actually helpful. It's not a big thing. They say you should put VAT on all kinds of transport, then it might become a big thing if you also put it on train and airplanes and everything. But that is to say, have you really exploited the whole field with the examples you've got here, or could there be more coming up than these examples we have gained, where it seems that VAT, taxation on energy and air transport might be the ones you find more interesting?
Thank you, Anne. Mr. Commissioner?
Anne Jensen, again, the point for VAT. I agree about the merits of stability of this taxation. That is why the GNI contribution should stay also, because if there is a wisdom of the past, experience of the past, that is also, that was mentioned by Mr. Gross, about instability of budgetary supply in the 80s, fluctuations, and we cannot afford that sort of fluctuations. GNI contribution is stabilizing budget. It shouldn't be the primary source. It is, but it is also a stabilization. This is the lesson, especially from the 80s. What is about new VAT, genuine VAT, is that first step should be to get rid from what is now called the VAT and what is connected to the British rebate. Yes. Therefore, if we are without this fictional, very complex VAT system that is existing now and contributing not much, because this is rather meaningless contribution to the budget, we should recalculate British rebate, which is another fantastic story, should be reflected in the ongoing negotiations. Visibly after either going to this generalized system of corrections, but British rebate will be one of the major heroes of the coming negotiations. And if we are to switch from existing complex artificial VAT to genuine VAT, we have to recalculate the British rebate as a step for the further negotiations. The list is not being closed, but I don't think we have now even the capacity to investigate many more candidates. We should rather concentrate on very technical impact analysis of existing candidates in order to move in a short time to the real proposal. I am fully conscious of how risky it will be, but it has to be done.
Thank you, Commissioner. Does Dr. Gross want to come in on this?
Just, if I may, so one side remark on the British rebate, which is basically linked to the CAP. So I would say let's keep that part out of the discussion here. That is linked to one particular expenditure. And those who defend the CAP should just say how they deal with the British rebate.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to the next questions. I think we'll take a few of them at a time since we have limited amount of time. So the next question or comment will go to Mr. Gerbrandi and then his Dutch colleague, Mr. Mulder. So these two comments, and then we'll move on back to the panel.
Thank you, Carl. And I thank both Mr. Lewandowski and Mr. Gross for their contributions so far. I make a distinction between accountants and politicians. And accountants just look at the income and outcome, and they draw a line, and then they see what the final outcome is. And that's what they're interested in. They're not interested in how something is coming in and how something is going out. They're just looking at income and outcome. That is the way that most of the member states are looking at the European budget at the moment. They're just interested in the final outcome. They're not interested in any added value to European expenditure in their own member state, as long as it's in their member state. The other side are politicians who are more interested in this added value based on a longer-term vision. And I don't consider myself an accountant. I consider myself a politician, and I hope that we get more politicians in our member states. My question to both of Mr. Gross and Mr. Lewandowski is that looking at the way that we came to a very difficult budget 2011, I foresee even more difficulties for the financial perspectives. It's going to be a very, very messy fight. And also because there are a lot of accountants around the table who are just interested in the numbers and the final outcome. Don't you believe that going to more own resources would be also for those member states who are strongly opposing the idea now, would be some sort of face-saver? And especially for the accountants, because if we come up with very smart own resources, then we can find accountancy rules, how it's not reflected in their national budgets, and they are even coming out better than without the own resources. Do you see any opportunities into that direction? And that it's a possible safer for getting, well, an end result for the financial perspectives.
Thank you. And then we have Mr. Mulder, and then we'll come back to the panel. Jan.
Thank you very much. I agree with everybody that has said that we must employ somewhere in the Commission or elsewhere a spin doctor that can put forward the merits of the budget in a better way. Because everything that has been said until now is translated in some kind of negative comment, European taxes and all kinds of nonsense. So I think the Commission should, in its publicity department or porte-parole, whatever you call it, engage somebody who can clearly explain the budget to the general public. There's certainly some work to do as far as that is concerned. Then a number of questions. As far as I'm concerned, the British rebate is there forever. I don't know who was as stupid as that in 1984, but we made an agreement with no time limit in it, and it carries on forever. Does the Commission see any possibility of getting rid of it by way of changing the own resources system? And if that is not the case, I think it is completely reasonable that you have one system if the rebate has to be maintained. If you have a system for one country, I think it should be applied as well to all other countries that are in a similar situation as the United Kingdom, as far as the net payments are concerned, etc. That, in my view, is unavoidable. Now, Commissioner Schreier recognized that and put forward a proposal in that sense. It was in 2003, I think. Now, for some reason or another, it was never seriously discussed. Does the Commission think it is useful to go again on the same path and propose some universal rebate system so that you have a limit to the national contributions per head of the population or whatever it might be? And then again about the visibility, I belong to those who think that the VAT system is quite a good system, provided, and I think the technology makes it possible now, that everybody can see it. If I get a bill somewhere, from somewhere, it says always so much VAT I have to pay. It doesn't say where it is to go. But instead of the 19%, you could always say 17% is going to the national budget and 2% is going to the European budget. Then the public knows where it is going, and we are more responsive to demands from the public, how it is being spent. Now then, Mr. Gross said it as well, I think. If we change something about the rebate, that is always connected to the common agricultural policy, because that's the demand of the United Kingdom. You have to change the common agricultural policy, and then we will talk about changing the rebate as well. Now, in the last interinstitutional agreement, there is a declaration of the Parliament in which it is saying, and more or less requesting the Commission, in the midterm review, to consider the merits, pro and contra, without taking any position, of co-financing the common agricultural policy, like the other parts of the budget. My question to the Commission is, why wasn't this item touched upon in the budget review, despite the request of the Parliament in the interinstitutional agreement, of which Mr. Lewandowski is as familiar as I am?
Thank you, Mr. Mulder. Now we'll go back to the panel. We could start with Mr. Gross this time, and then Mr. Lewandowski has the time to prepare for all the more or less easy questions that you have to answer.
Okay, I'll deal with the accounting and leave the political issues to Mr. Lewandowski. I think we have a potential of transforming the national politicians from accountants into politicians if we use the true VAT approach. Because right now they calculate, I get X billion into my budget, and then the X billion go from my own treasury to the EU. With the true VAT system, of course, the balance at the national level wouldn't be affected at all, right? But both revenues and so-called expenditures would be much less. That's one point, but I think even more important is that then when there are decisions to be taken, there would be typically a decision about the rate of VAT. And that would be one European number, so to speak, which is completely different from saying, okay, I pay a bit more, you pay a bit more, and then we get into this game where those guys with the best Excel program win because they are quickest in calculating the impact on the net balances. And then we come into the more political issues. How much do we want to pay for Europe? 1% of VAT, 1.2, 1.5, and so on. So that's why I think that is one additional advantage of the VAT system, if you can get it through clean. And I stand by my statement of earlier that the the British rebate issue is something completely different, has nothing to do with the VAT system as such. That is linked to the CAP, and that I leave to my neighbor to deal with.
Okay, Mr. Commissioner, the CAFP report form and everything else.
That was almost our promise here, not to touch British rebate and CAP, but it was, we are provoked simply. But firstly, I would like to agree with the diagnosis of Mr. Gerbrandy. We have that sort of accounting mentality present in negotiations over budget, and that is not allowing us to discuss in a rational way the policy objectives. Yes, but this is a fact of life. I can share with you my very simple wisdom on how to make the deal. Wisdom number one is that we cannot afford in the ongoing negotiations neither big winners or big losers. Otherwise, we have no agreement. But the second, in the final round, it shouldn't be about finance ministers at the table. For me, Coreper is better, for example, because they are more understanding European Union. The calculation on the side of each finance ministers, and almost all of them are now in the trouble, is that they are calculating contribution as the expenditure, not as an investment into the future of Europe, but this is expenditure, this is a burden, while the benefits are coming normally to the beneficiaries beyond finance ministry. So the very specific point of view of finance ministry, which is legitimate under the present conditions, shouldn't be present in the final round, because then we could have only juste retour, and that is not about juste retour, because this is falsified calculation, really. Burden, but the revenues coming to the local authorities, to the regional authorities, to the beneficiaries of grants, to the farmers, that is beyond the finance ministry. I am sure that this is important because it will be reflected in the ongoing negotiations. We need really assistance of the Parliament to shape the decent budgets until 2013, because the level of 2013 will be very much crucial as a point of reference when discussing the future. And we have really mushrooming expenditure for the coming 2 years, and here is my problem. I don't know how to say the truth of what is needed for 2012 and 2013, given the experience of being in the Council with 6% growth last year for the 2011 budget. By going in June with own resources choice, we are not making our life easier in this surrounding. Rather, whether we are skillful enough to make this face-saving exercise for the finance ministers, let us see. We are working on the way of communicating it and making consolidation of the public finance easier. This is the only way to sell it, really. Otherwise, this is only about problems. But I know that anyway, in this final round of negotiation, Parliament is going to raise the issue of own resources. So we should be ready with calculations, with a solid basis, a calculated basis for negotiations. Otherwise, we should improvise in the moment, very well remembered by Annie Jensen and Jan Mulder in 2005 and in 2006 especially, when it came to negotiations between what was agreed between the governments and the Parliament. As for the questions of Mr. Mulder, I am not, when you read our budgetary review and read the mandate for the budgetary review, what is easily to be noticed is that we should be obliged to investigate the revenue side, including British rebate. But we are not touching British rebate in the budgetary review, because there was a time coincidence between our publication and the program of Mr. Cameron, which was rather painful for the citizens of United Kingdom, and we didn't want to provoke anymore. I'm already non grata personality in Great Britain, so that is but this is one of the member states to make the deal. This is very important. I have a hearing in the House of Lords that is going to be very interesting exercise we agreed to go there. We should take the issue of, discuss the issue of a British rebate in full understanding of symbolic value of this rebate, which is decreasing in volume. That was more than 6 billion euro by 2008, and in the budget 2011, this is the value of around 3 billion. But although this is decreasing sharply in value, it has the same political weight in the British discussion. So if we want to have them on board of real final deal, we cannot provoke too much. For me, this is very clear, and I am repeating on many occasions, and that is why I am non grata personality. The initial justifications are no longer valid. That was the time of agriculture being more than 60% of the budget, and Great Britain was below the average per capita, below the European average. Now, that is different reality of the budget and different reality of this relative affluence of the British citizens, but we need them to gain agreement. Therefore, we should understand also the symbolic political weight of rebate that should be a hero of the discussions. I don't want really, for the same reason, to go deeply into the CAP, but Jan, you know that in the final end, the position of the member states is rather conservative on this point. And CAP will be better politically defended, not re-nationalized, but as CAP, as a part of budget, than, for example, cohesion. We have already a very strongly organized lobby in favor of common agricultural policy being not less than it is now in the budget. My assumption is that it should be less, and probably the final decision will be about less, but it will provoke immediately reactions from several capitals, including my home country. I am always reminded that I am from a rural country, which is no longer quite true, but Poland shouldn't be on the front line. We have another candidate for this leading position in defending agriculture. But believe me, I don't want to touch these very sensitive issues now with detailed vision of what is to be proposed by June 2010. The discussion should be without taboos. British rebate cannot be among taboos. CAP should have, not to the disadvantage of the farmers, but should weight a little bit less in the European budget than between 2007 and 2013. But given this very delicate type of expressing myself, I am immediately provoking already reactions. So I don't want to make more of a problem before disclosure of our communication.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for being so outspoken. We have 4 more questions, and we're almost running out of time, so I will ask the speakers to be fairly brief, and I'll also have to ask then the panel to be fairly brief. 2 next, hopefully brief questions are from my colleagues, Mrs. Goulart and Mr. Teurer. So, Sylvie, the floor is yours.
Oui, Monsieur le Commissaire, bonjour, merci. Commissioner, good afternoon, and thank you for coming. One thing that I thought was quite interesting in Mr. Noteboom's presentation is that he actually forgot about the crisis of the empty chair back in 75. I'm right. The crisis, sorry, in 65, the crisis of the empty chair was actually a problem of own resources with the General de Gaulle. So it's nothing new to us. And I think that really you have in your hands the most difficult issue that's going to have to be dealt with in the construction of the European Union because of the financial implications. Money always hurts. And also because this is really at the heart of the construction of a democratic parliamentary democracy. And so I think we've got to be very, very relaxed. It's the worst issue to deal with across the board. We will try and help you, but I'm not sure whether we're going to have the parliamentary time to help you very much. But this is really going to be the main battle of the Parliament. We've gotten the power from a body that didn't want to give us the power. Up until now, we haven't had to deal with an empty chair situation, so it's progress already. But there are two things that I would like to mention. You talked about a problem of communication, but I think we've got to be clear. It's not just that there are taboos, but there are actually people who are not telling the truth. That's who we're dealing with. The Council is behaving in a very odd way when they tell us, for example, in December, they said that austerity meant that we had to reduce expenditure at community level. Now, in any company, we know that we can make savings of scale, economies of scale, and their reasoning is that no matter what level you're looking at, wherever you're putting the finances, the efficiency of your finances is the same. Now, that really is an economics lesson for idiots. To be honest, this is really a ridiculous choice, and I do agree with an austerity policy, but I feel that simply this hardship situation should actually help us, and that's something that we've got to fight for. We've got to work along those lines. And second thing was mentioned by my colleagues, and that is the unity of the single market. I'm very surprised to see, I'm very noted to see that we've actually flagged up financial contributions when at the same time we're talking about being in a market where the economic force moves around. This is the famous effect of the VAT. You're going on holiday wherever, but we actually talk about the country where you bought the ice cream or the pair of flip-flops, whatever, whereas that's not really important. I think that there's a debate to be led, and Mr. Simitare mentioned this yesterday in the Econ Committee, and I think that there is a link to be made between the development of fiscality within the internal market and how we finance the EU. And I think that the best way is to denationalize these expenses. I'm not sure whether you've actually got into more detail on that. I'd like to know how you would behave vis-à-vis the laxism that we have on the Single Market Act and what Mr. Barnier has suggested, the follow-up to Monti report. We can actually see economic rationality in an area where we have done everything in the last 50 years to try and get rid of the national flag as far as the economic activity is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie and Mikael.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioner, and dear colleagues. Well, first of all, I would like to ask a question about whether we have looked enough at the title of today's seminar, which is the financing of the European Union in times of austerity, towards a more independent source of revenue. Now, an independent source, but independent of what? Independent of the decision-making of the member states, or is it independent of austerity? So, do we want to have a more stable source of income than the member states themselves? I think it's probably not going to be possible for the EU to work outside of the economic situation or the income situation of the citizens of the EU. So that means that if we're talking about financial difficulties within the member states themselves, that's also going to lead to financial difficulties for the European Union at that level as well. The EU can't actually prosper when its member states are not prospering. We cannot be better off than our citizens, independent of the decisions of member states. Well, as far as political decisions are concerned, yes, that's possible. That's very sensible indeed, because some aspects, and this is my question to you, Commissioner, in your presentation, I think that you were a little bit too brief, but maybe I didn't quite understand all of your presentation. But I think that when we talk about own resources, we've seen a reduction in the income from customs. With the new free trade agreements, we're seeing that our receipts from customs are actually dropping, and we haven't had any real discussion about how we make up for that shortfall. Overall, the tax situation is actually very closely linked to the real economic situation. And in areas where we saw great increases in the economy in the past, is not actually being subjected to VAT. And in many cases, I'm talking here about the stock markets. They're not actually subjected to any proper taxation. And so I would like to know what the Commission feels about this, whether we should be introducing a tax on financial market transactions to make up for the drop in customs revenue. Wouldn't that be the key for us to overcome this problem? Because such a tax, such taxation could actually be seen as a European or international tax, and that's the only way it makes sense. And as this taxation would be able to then to participate in the public financing by being part of our resources. That's how I see it. And so in that context, I have another question as well as to what extent you feel that a tax system should look at macroeconomic stabilization and how it can contribute to macroeconomic stabilization. We haven't talked about that yet, and perhaps we should be talking about this in the future, look to see what type of macroeconomic stabilizers are necessary, at least in the euro area. So that's what I would ask you, Commissioner, to look at, and to look at the question of a tax on the stock markets or on trading on the stock market to help the EU shortfall. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Commissioner, or maybe Mr. Gross wants to start. The Commissioner looks a little worried, so let's.
Okay, tax on financial transactions. To the extent that financial transactions are representing value added, being invoiced by companies, they are subject to VAT in that sense. I presume what you have in mind is a special tax just on a transaction per se. Again, I'm not particularly a fan of it, nor am I particularly against it. I think it has very merits. But again, we have to think about the stability of that resource. Because when financial market structure changes, certain transactions perhaps take place somewhere else, and this kind of revenue is very, very volatile. That's why I would be rather cautious to make that an important part of the revenues. VAT, compared to everything else, VAT is, let's say, the most stable you can get. Nothing is perfectly stable. You have to eat. But financial transactions, we know they go, right? Transactions in the stock exchanges really follow the level of the prices, so they go up and down a lot. On your remark about austerity, I just my reading is a quite simple one. The Parliament can get in the negotiations about the new financial framework one big thing. That could either be, if you want, more money, different structure of expenditure, or a new resource system. I think it's a choice of this House to, maybe you want to choose for everything, that's your choice. My feeling is that if you let the finance ministers win the argument on austerity, you get something long-term extremely valuable, namely different structure of revenues. And then you have to wait perhaps 7 years with low revenues, but at least you have a different structure. And to link that to what Paul de Grauwe is going to say later, right now the EU, the guarantee for the EU is basically contributions by member states. And that's why also the EU is paying 60 basis points more than even Germany, although it has zero debt. With real own resources, maybe then it could also be a really independent borrower whose credibility in the market and whose rating in the market does not depend only on the reflection of the member states, but on the stability of its own resource base. Again, you would start low, right? But you would have something which is systemically different. That's why I would argue that one should go for the system, for the change in the system, rather than trying to change something at the margin of otherwise very complicated existing systems.
Thank you, Mr. Gross. You're actually already getting into the next panel team, which is very, very interesting. But we'll get back to that debate very soon. Now, Mr. Commissioner, you have a long list of friendly questions.
I still feel at home here. I am not fully mentally transferred to the...
In the House of Lords it shall be different.
Yeah, it will. Well, still a parliament, and a cradle of parliamentary democracy. Madame Goulon, right to the point, what is our problem in visibility of our aims in budgetary negotiations? The logic of the national budgets is automatically transmitted to the logic of budgetary negotiations on the European budget. Although there are big differences, not only that we are not producing debt or we are running without deficit, but there are different credibilities. Nowadays in Europe, in many countries, this is about austerity to regain the confidence of the financial markets. Yes, that is the credibility of the finance minister. To regain the confidence of the financial markets, that is meaning austerity. That transmitted to the European budget shouldn't mean austerity, it should mean self-discipline in administration, and perhaps decommissioning the programs that are not non-performing, a sort of savings. Okay, but our credibility is to deliver what was agreed in the financial perspective 2007-2013. And the logic of a financial perspective is that the expenditure, the payments are growing with maturity of the programs. And these are bills to be paid. We cannot replace the default of the national budget with a European budget default. We are to be credible. We have to pay the bills. And here is the problem for 2012, 2013, because there is lack of understanding that this is the logic of the credibility of the European Union, and this is about mainly investment. This is the other important difference between national budgets, which are normally consumed in the annual cycle, and the European budget. This is so much about investment that is conducive to growth and jobs. But here is again the point of the question of communication. I have to admit that we are not professional enough in explaining what's the major difference in the logic of European budget vis-à-vis the national budgets in time of austerity. And the next question, that is about customs. Customs are now around 11% of the budget, the rest and the collection costs, that is allowance for the member states, that is the privilege also of Rotterdam. 25. That has increased, and that is, while increasing to 25% as a collection cost for the member state, that is less around 3 billion euro for the European budget, more or less. That is the calculation. But you have mentioned the longer term dynamics of the trade liberalization. Yes, it should come, and it should affect that part of genuine own resources, as, for example, we are to open negotiations with Mercosur for the benefit of industrial products of European Union, a large developing market of Brazil, of Argentina, and the other countries, but the cost is the imports of agricultural products, but not if there is a real agreement, not burdened, not charged with the customs. So, of course, in the longer term dynamics, I see the problem that if we are real about trade liberalization, we should calculate less from customs. That is one more argument for the genuine own resources. And as for the financial sector taxation, that was already discussed. Mr. Daniel Gross was formerly with IMF. IMF was always rather in favor of activity taxation that is closer to corporate taxation, less volatile than the transaction, taxing the transactions, because the area in the area of transaction taxation, the field of maneuver to evade is much bigger when you tax the bodies, the corporations, that is activity type of taxation. And on our list, there is a clear preference when coming to the financial sector, the only one I think admissible, almost populist in a populistic way, that we should punish these bad speculators. So this is politically very much admissible nowadays, but this is a populistic argument, I know. That is a preference for rather activity type of taxing than operations, that is transaction type of taxation. And that is all I can say at this very moment.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now we have two more questions, and now we're really lacking behind schedule, so I'm going to have to ask you to be very short. I have the lady in the light blue shirt, and then we have our liberal friend from the Committee of the Regions. Please present yourselves very briefly, and then a brief question. I will have some brief comments from the panel, and then we're going to move on to the next topic. So the floor is yours. Is there no microphone over there?
Ah oui, merci. Mon nom c'est Stella Veli.
I'm Stella Veli. I'm a European citizen, and I'm an IT expert, a physician, and I'd like to give you an EU citizen's eye view of EU financing. First of all, a suggestion. There are 4 sources for the European institutions: agriculture, duties, VAT, GNI resources, and I think it is a good idea for the European institutions to become autonomous, independent, financially speaking. Why don't you add something to the 4? Other sources of funding which are independent of the member states. If you look at imports of gas from Russia to Europe, for example, that could be taxed, or transport of persons and goods, perhaps. I don't know how the customs duty is calculated, but those are just a few examples. And you don't need the agreement of the member states for something like that. And then there are European projects that you fund. It might be better to choose projects which are partly self-funded, not 100% funded by the European institutions. Now, I do have a question. In the situation of financial and economic crisis, what are the economic measures to be taken at the level of the European institutions? And perhaps there could be a comparison between what you have done, the savings you've made, and the efforts made to get people out of poverty and improve education systems in the European Union. Now, I think there are some things which will be necessary for the European institutions. Now, austerity is imposed on the member states, but what actually are the European institutions doing? I think the proposals from your group are very interesting. I think particularly the proposal that Parliament should just work in one city and not shuttle from Brussels to Strasbourg all the time. Obviously, that costs a lot of money.
Questions, not comments, unfortunately, at this stage. Do you want to wrap up with the question? But I need a question, and then we're going to move on. I'm sorry, but we're running out of time.
Bon, moi, je pense qu'il faut...
Well, I think you need perhaps new institutions, well, I think more effective work should be done. Otherwise, we find that things are mushrooming and becoming less effective.
Thank you. And then our friend from the Committee of the Regions.
Thank you very much. My name is Flo Klukas. I'm president of the ALDE group in the Committee of the Regions. And I want to pick up on Commissioner Lewandowski's point in relation to communications. If we don't get communications right, if we are not able to convince the citizen of the value of what we do, then I'm very much afraid that we are going to lose the battle, and we will not see either an increase in the budget or indeed own resources being agreed for the very reasons that have been outlined. Andrew Duff suggested that we should have an interparliamentary conference which would look at the whole issue of the budget and how it was resourced. I think that's a very good suggestion which we would like to support. However, if you look at the role of local and regional authorities in relation to the European Union budget, and if you look at the closeness of those authorities and those people at local level to the citizen, and if you look at the fact that you actually have here an institution which has for many years been an ally of the Commission, although perhaps not such a close ally of the Parliament in the past, then there is actually a real opportunity, if we can come together, to create something which we can use at party political level in our own member states, at local and regional level, to begin to convince our citizens of the value of what we do. And the reason is very simple. It's this. It's at that level that the European Union is actually seen as its most active. It is not here in Brussels with respect to all of us who sit here. It is actually when citizens see new infrastructure, new training courses, new jobs, new businesses in our towns, cities, villages, regions, universities, colleges, businesses. That's when they see the European Union in action. And we are there, if you wish to use us as a conduit towards making things happen at that level, towards seeing the successes that have been built, and indeed learning from those areas which haven't been as successful. But we would like, obviously, to play a part in that, and I would hope that should that conference go ahead, that you would see a role for us in the Committee of the Regions in being there as an ally, as a voice, as a conduit between Brussels and the citizen and Brussels on a daily basis.
Thank you. And now, final comments by the Commissioner and Dr. Gross on the two questions, and also this will be your final remarks of this panel. Mr. Commissioner.
I think the first question was rather indicating what might be the topic of the next seminar, as it is not too large to be discussed, to be responded today. As for our candidates, a modest list of 6 selected out of much larger list of potential own resources, that is aviation levy, financial sector, VAT, CAT, energy and emission trading. We are not rather to extend the list. We are to concentrate and calculate to prepare for the real battle over feasibility of own resources in the European Union. And I am of different opinion as to the method we are to deal with European projects, with the challenges, not by setting new agencies. That is too easily done in the European Union. If there is a problem, to set up an agency, the body to deal with the problem. We have to be modest, given the austerity time, with expansion of administrative cost. The experience says clearly that once the agency is being set up, annually it asks for more posts and money. Therefore, the first way to limit the administrative cost, the most unpopular cost, the cost making the life of Eurosceptics so easy, because the European project is being criticized via administration cost mainly. We have to say the stop to the existing, to the mushrooming of various bodies, enough of them already existing in the 27 countries, including Brussels. As for the regions, yes, the regions, apart from the parliament, are the best possible allies in shaping the discussion over the future of European finances in a rational way. Here is visibility of European action. Sometimes this is schizophrenic as people see the investment, and on the other hand, they are ready to listen to this stereotype of budget for the Eurocrats. Sometimes it is schizophrenic given that the mood of media in some countries are so easily against the European Union. But here is my optimism, apart from this very strategic partnership with the Parliament. The regions of Europe, including, for example, Wales, including Cornwall, Northern Ireland, or Scottish territory, including these areas which are still expecting reinforcement for the investment projects. So thank you for indicating one more ally in this difficult, peaceful, pacifistic battle over the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Dr. Gross?
This battle will not be peaceful. If it's peaceful, it will be marginal tinkering, which will make the system only worse. I think here one has to go for radical change. And that doesn't come without a fight and without a prize. Yeah, I mean, peaceful, you know what I mean, right? Maybe there will be a chaise vide or two, but without confrontation, this system is not reformable.
Thank you. Now, I have the pleasure of thanking our panelists. Thank you, Dr. Gross. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. A big applaud for the two panelists. And we're going to swiftly move on to the next panel. And we have a very, very hot and interesting topic, namely the Eurobonds, which have been widely debated within our group. And we have two very experienced panelists that will discuss the topic with us. So welcome up Professor De Grauw and Mr. Dominique de Crayancourt.
Maybe in the meanwhile, a short story, because Mr. Lewandowski talked about Hamilton in 1719. So another story is that Hamilton in 1719 created a common bond market in the US for the 13 independent states. And you know what was the enemy for that? Abraham Lincoln. And how they had made the deal? Well, Hamilton received his common debt market, and they made the debt agency in the capital of Virginia, what was the state of Lincoln. So maybe if we can do the same now, we create a European debt market and we put the debt agency in Frankfurt. I think it's more or less what the Americans did.
This was not in the ALDE short paper, but...
That's not in the short paper, that's no. Simply...
But we can still bring it up again.
So then everybody's ready.
Everyone, including Alvaro, are looking happy. Good. Friends, we have, as I mentioned, two very distinguished guests with us, and we're going to start with Professor Paul De Grauw, who is a professor and chief of the Economic Studies Center in Leuven, but you also have a background as a politician. So you can combine your very, very wide academic background with your skills as a former politician to give us some introduction to the topic. So the floor is yours. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to talk about Eurobonds as a step towards political union and as an engine for growth. Let me just make a few introductory remarks. As you know, the Eurozone is in a deep existential crisis. And this crisis has certainly also increased the consensus that we need more political union to preserve the Eurozone. But as you all know, there is very little appetite today for more political union. Therefore, if the euro is to be preserved, a strategy of small steps is probably the only thing we can do, right? And it is in that framework that I want to argue that the Eurobond issue is an important first significant but small step towards a political union that can first pacify financial markets and bring back financial stability, and also, second, that it can be seen as a boost to economic growth in the Eurozone. I will also draw some attention on the objections that exist, because they are important and they should be taken care of when we design an optimal Eurobond. So let me start with the political dimension, why Eurobonds are a necessity. The crisis that we experience today has degenerated into an existential crisis of the Eurozone. Right? Investors now ask themselves the question of whether the Eurozone, as we know it today, will continue to exist. Right? And this lack of trust in the future of the Eurozone is the source of endemic instability in which we are now, because it transforms each bit of bad news about one particular country into bad news for the system as a whole. Right? And this creates a vicious circle that must be halted. It can only happen, this halting of the vicious circle, if the member countries are willing to design a mechanism that will convince the market about the seriousness of their commitment towards the Eurozone. And solemn declarations will not be sufficient. They are just seen as being cheap talk. And my claim is that the common Eurobond issue is such a mechanism, right? By jointly issuing Eurobonds, the participating countries become jointly liable for the debt they have issued together. And this is a very visible and constraining commitment that should convince the market that member countries are serious about the future of the euro. So the Eurobond issue is a commitment device whereby governments accept to tie their own hands, so to say, and thereby signaling financial markets that they are serious about the maintenance of the Eurozone, which today is not the case. There are doubts about the commitment of some individual countries, whether they are willing to stand by the future of the Eurozone. So we need this kind of device, this signal. And then also when we have this, market participants will see this as a first step on the road to political union. Because, for example, it will also, and we had a discussion earlier, make it patently clear that we need own resources for the European Union. Right? Once you have bond issues that are joint, you need fiscal capacity, and that pushes you in that direction. And this then, once you do that, I think will pacify financial markets, because they will take away the existential fears that today exist and that destabilize the market and will continue to destabilize the market. So there's a political need, right? And probably the most important reason. I mean, if you ask me what is the most important reason for having Eurobonds, then I would say is the political dimension, the signaling this device that you create. But of course, there are also financial and economic reasons for having the Eurobonds. So let me concentrate on them now. First of all, the financial one. I'm not going to say very much about this. This is well known. By creating a large bond market in the Eurozone that can compete with the dollar bond market in size, it also creates a market with lots of liquidity, and this makes it attractive for outside investors to step in. These outside investors from Asia, for example, are often in search of diversification, and this then can also create benefits for the AAA countries in the Eurozone, because they can then also profit from this liquidity effect. Maybe not so much Germany, but Holland, for example, that is also a AAA country, would profit from this higher liquidity that it doesn't have today. Right? Then the other major point that I want to make, the Eurobond as an engine for growth, right, which is, I think, very important also. And let me start as follows. We are now in the process forced by financial markets, in my view, excessive budgetary austerity, but that's what we have to do these days. And this austerity in the Eurozone forces many governments to cut back on public investment projects. One of the most robust results from the theory and the empirics of economic growth is that public investments, both in infrastructure and education, are a significant variable in boosting economic growth. Right? So we have lots of evidence backing this. Because public investment, there are many channels to which public investments do this, but one channel is just raising overall productivity in the economy and thereby boosting the potential for growth in the economy. Right? But unfortunately, as so often, academic evidence is not taken into account when decisions have to be made. And also in this case, despite this strong positive relation between public investment and economic growth, European governments that were constrained in going towards austerity have cut back public investment first and more dramatically than any other spending item. Let me show you a little graph here that illustrates this for the Eurozone. It's not a complete Eurozone here because I didn't have all the data. It's the 7 largest Eurozone countries, representing 85% of the total. And here I show the public investment as a percent of GDP in these countries. The blue line is the Eurozone, the red line is the US, and the contrast is quite strong. You see how public investment as a percent of GDP was more than 3.5% in 1980, now has dropped below 2.5%. Note also how during the 1990s, during the process of the Maastricht austerity, governments cut back on public investment, thereby paving the way towards a low-growth Eurozone. Right? Let me show that here. Here I show you, on the one hand, the blue line is public investment as a percent of GDP, on average during the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and the red line is the GDP growth in these same countries. And you see the dramatic decline in economic growth in the Eurozone, which to a certain degree, I'm not going to claim that it's all due to public investment, but to a certain degree can also be located in this decline of public investment in the Eurozone. It's quite dramatic, it's quite sad also, that we simply have concentrated on other things like flexibility, structural reform. These were seen as the things that would bring growth, and at the same time governments were cutting back on public investment instead of using public investment as a mechanism for growth. Let me return to the previous graph, and here you see also a dramatic difference between the Eurozone in the last 2 years and in the US. Right? The US government seems to have understood that the best way to fight a recession is through a dramatic increase in public investment. We reduce public investment, thereby also making it more difficult in the future to restore growth. So I think this difference, again, is quite striking and sad for governance of the Eurozone. Right? Okay. Now let me say, I think, I wanted to say a few more things about this. I think this decline in public investment in the Eurozone must be halted and reversed. And here the joint issue of Eurobonds can be a factor in this reversal. And I see 2 ways one could do that. One way could be to require countries that participate in a joint Eurobond issue to increase public investment as a percent of their GDP, kind of condition. You have to do it, right, if you want to enjoy the common Eurobond issue. And another way would consist in directly issuing Eurobonds to finance European infrastructure, as have been proposed by other people in the past, Delors, but recently Verhofstadt. And both approaches, I think, would help to raise public investment, thereby increasing productivity and economic growth in the Eurozone. Let me now turn to some of the objections that have been raised concerning Eurobonds. and they have to be taken seriously because otherwise it will be a non-starter. And here there are two types of objections. One could be called moral hazard objections, right, which you certainly understand, which can be phrased in the following way. When you issue jointly Eurobonds, you create an implicit insurance for the participating countries. Since countries are collectively responsible for the joint debt issue, an incentive is created for countries, for some countries, to rely on this implicit insurance and to issue too much debt, right? And that creates a lot of resistance in some countries that fear that others will go in that direction. And so this moral hazard risk, which in some countries, I'm thinking of Germany, Holland, other northern countries in particular, plays a big role in public discussion, must be dealt with. The other issue, objections had to do with the possible low attractiveness of such a joint bond issue for the AAA countries, right? Because they can today collect funds at the best possible conditions, and by joining a club where you have some member countries that have much less favorable credit ratings, it may be the case that the AAA countries lose and have to pay more. So that's a common objection that we have to take care carefully. So how to design a common Eurobond? I'm not going to go into the detail. There's been a lot of discussion here, but what I propose is to work on quantities and pricing of Eurobonds, a combination of proposals that have been made. One that you certainly know has been proposed by Bruegel, the blue and red bonds approach, where the participation in a common Eurobond would be limited to a certain percent of GDP, say 60% or whatever, and that would be the blue bond component, which could be considered to be senior compared to the
debate, and I'm sure we have a lot of colleagues who want to come in on the new graphs and other issues. We have Mr. Dominique de Crayancourt, who's from the EIB, who's done a very long career within the investment bank, and today he's the Director of Institutional Affairs. And the EIB has a very good and broad experience in this field, so welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I think the few words I'm going to say are going to be very complementary to what Professor de Groot just said, because I think he's concentrated a bit of attention on the issuing side, where I would like to take you on the other side, on the investment side for a while. Indeed, we observe, and you've been discussing this afternoon, enough of this. I don't need to extend on the budgetary difficulties, the sovereign debt problems, the capital market problems, and as very well explained by Professor de Groot, the risk, more than a risk, the actual penalty that has been the consequence on investment. Now, actually, we see also that the budget of the member states are tight, but that the mitigated sign of recovery of the capital markets are going to be kind of creating difficulties for the several bond issues of member states and other issuers on the market. The banks, on the other hand, all banks, public and private banks, are consolidating still after the crisis, and the Basel III effects are going to create additional difficulties and have a bearing on the risk-taking capacity. So the problem really, as we see it, is how to protect investment, as investment is really the driver for growth and jobs. We have, for instance, an estimate, very rough estimate, that infrastructure investment in Europe are of the order of 1.5 to 2 trillion between now and 2020. So this is just to give an idea of the size of the problem or what's at stake. European Investment Bank, as the Bank of the Union, treaty-based bank, is actually borrowing and lending. So we make this for a living in terms of financing investment, and we see ourselves kind of as the second leg alongside the EU budget to promote EU policies and invest in EU priorities. So the question as we see it is how to maximize the resources put at financing investment, tapping the available liquidity, because liquidity is available on the market, particularly with long-term institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, and the like. So let me go through 4 points. My first point here is about Euro bonds. What are we talking about? I think it's extremely complicated at the moment to distinguish clearly what people have in mind when they use the word Eurobond. We have had in the distant past, as reminded by Mr. Nottenboom earlier on, other experiences, and the well-known one was of Jacques Delors, who wanted to finance trans-European infrastructure through the issuance of Eurobonds by the community at the time. Now we're talking about solving the sovereign crisis and the budget problems of the members of the Eurozone and stabilizing the euro. But let me maybe use a shortcut to identify 3 completely different concepts here. And allow me to call them the Juncker bonds, the Delors bonds, and the Barroso bonds. The Delors bonds, we remember, I think, tapping the markets as the community to finance trans-European networks, essentially. The Juncker bonds are the ones I think Professor de Grauw mainly talked about, currently trying to help solve the sovereign crisis in the Euro member states. The Barroso bonds are actually a very different thing because they are potentially bonds to be issued by the private sector. I could not insist enough on this. Bonds to be issued by the private sector to finance investment. Unfortunately, I don't have a slide with me, but I might distribute this very simple little matrix afterwards where I've tried to say, who is the issuer, the EU institution as an issuer, or the private sector as an issuer? And here, investment as a use of the money, whereas here, it's budget replenishment as the use of the money. And then we have the Delors bonds, the Barroso bonds, and the Juncker bonds. So I think this is extremely important for the discussion we have on Eurobonds. And what I will now concentrate upon is more on the bonds that help finance investment. And for this, I would like to start by saying that when bonds are issued, particularly by a public entity, they could basically be used for 2 things. They could be used, as I said, to finance investments, in which case it is the revenue of the investment that will help finance the service of the bonds, interest and capital repayment. But they could also be used to simply fuel or extend budgets, in which case it is the next budgets that will actually help finance the repayment and the service of the bonds. And I believe it's the second case that member states have never accepted very much, a little bit, but not very much, the community and now the union to do. So I think it's worth extending on this, and I'm going to say a few words about this. My second point is about grants versus loans, or equity, as the case may be. We believe, and we're discussing a lot with the Commission, that it is potentially a waste of grant resources to apply them to investments that are capable to pay back a loan resource. So why financing with a grant something that can be financed with a loan if the investment is capable to pay back? And the same, in a way, could be said about what we do in the EIB. Why putting an EIB loan at a project that is so good financially that the market can do it without the EIB, and the private sector and banks can do that without the support of EIB. So on the basis of these 2 principles, we have designed what we call the blending route, which is the conceptual framework in which to decide whether an investment should be financed by a grant, by a loan, by an equity, by the market, or by whatever source of finance. But by the way, we have put this in a document that was approved by the board of EIB and sent to the Commission and to the Parliament in 2008 in the framework of the budget review, where we try to conceptualize this question of when to go for grants, when to go for loans. And to extend on this for just a moment, basically we have three criteria that we use. The first criterion is applicable to all sources of finance. It is the quality of the investment for the society as a whole. We call it the economic rate of return, not to confuse with the financial rate of return. That is, it's the rate of return for the society as a whole, including environmental impact, including tax revenues for the state, including saving on casualties if you build a new road where there will be less accidents. So this is the benefit of the project as a whole. If it's not good, you should not finance it anyway. If it is a good, economically viable project, then we should go to the second step, which is the financial viability of the project. If the project is highly profitable from a private point of view, it is most likely, particularly if it's a low-risk operation, that the private sector and the market will take care of it. There's no need to intervene. At the other extreme of the spectrum, if the rate of return financially for the investor is nil or negative, which happens, although it's economically good, the benefit go outside to the society as a whole and not to the investor, then probably you will have to go more to the grant in order to support your policy. In between, depending on the level of risks and the level of financial return, you can mix a certain level of equity investment or loan investment. So this is the approach we take, and we believe that the advantage, of course, of going with loans rather than with grants carry a number of benefits and interests, and notably the discipline that comes with the fact that the borrower has to repay, of course, the controls that accompany the discipline that I've just mentioned, the allocative efficiency, meaning the choice of projects and the choice of investments, which is more systematically directed to the best possible projects. This is actually what we do in the EIB with our large group also of technical people, engineers, economists that look at the quality of the project. And I must say it's very appreciated by a number of member states for their public investments because it helps them to select the right priorities. And I can tell you that in particular in the new member states, this has been one very important element of our activity. And there's another impact of this which we should really consider, and that's what we call the catalytic effect of our intervention, because many private sector finance sources, banks and others, will watch EIB. Does EIB go into this project? If yes, then we can go too, and that brings a lot of other sources of finance to the project. So I've said enough about the good things that EIB is doing, and you may say, then why using anything else in EIB? And that's where the problem comes, because in the EIB, we have had to respond to the crisis at the call of the Council and Parliament in the last 2 years. And by doing this, we have increased our activity enormously. I must say enormously because it was something like a 40% increase, some 50 billion, 50 billion increase in our loans in 2008, 2009. Well, 2 years from mid-2008 to mid-2010. That means a very, very large increase of our activity. And that is biting, if you want, if I can use the expression, on our capacity to grow. The capital adequacy ratio, as defined in Basel, is now extremely demanding in terms of the size of the capital for a AAA to be maintained. And I don't need to expand on the fact that without a AAA, there's no EIB. I mean, the business model is based on the AAA. So a lot of capital is consumed, and we cannot do this alone in the future, because as you probably know, the increase of our capital is limited by our capacity to produce, I should not say profits, but, you know, an excédent d'exploitation, which is the same as profit, but it's not designed as a profit, but the results of our activity is the way we finance our own growth. We are not going now to call on member states' capital increase. This would not be even considered. So that means we cannot do it alone. That means we need other sources. We have two alternative other sources that I would like to present. One is coming back to the blending approach and the new innovative financial instruments that are being prepared jointly with the Commission for the next financial framework. And the other, of course, is the more specifically the Eurobond possibility. So first of all, innovative financial instruments. Innovative financial instruments are being constructed with the Commission on the basis of experience that we've built over the last years. You probably know of the risk-sharing finance facility for research, the loan guarantee facility for TEN transport, and the competitiveness and innovation program, which, by the way, are the three joint EIB Commission programs that are in the last interinstitutional agreement, which unlocked the current financial perspective at the end of 2006. So we have built that experience. It works. I would like to say a few words about how it works and then explain what we're going for the future. The way it works is basically, the concept is based on a win-win between the EU budget and the EIB. I've explained that we have a capital constraint that limits our growth. Each time we make a loan, we need to put some capital aside, and there is a limit to what we can do. If the Commission can bring some of the EU budget, that can substitute the capital we don't have, so we can go further. For the Commission side, for the EU budget, the advantage is the multiplier, because each time, instead of putting €1 to a project, the advantage is that this is transformed into 5, 10, 20, 25 euros of financial instruments to support that policy. So that is what we call the win-win of the budget getting the multiplier effect and the bank getting the capital relief or capital alleviation. These instruments I will not expand too much upon, but I thought useful to mention them because one of them is the so-called project bonds. That is one of these instruments, the Barroso bonds, if I come back to my earlier description. So the idea of these project bonds is to allow the private companies that promote projects to tranche the credit resources they need in order to have the best possible tranche available for institutional investors like pension funds and insurance companies who need at least a single A level in order to invest, by taking at the EIB plus EU level the subordinated tranche. It's a bit of a financial engineering that we can explain better if you're interested, but that is mixing budget resources and bank resources in order to leverage private sector and market resources. But let me insist again, these project bonds would be issued by the private sector and supported by EU budget and EIB funds. Finally, project bonds, because I've said, okay, EIB bonds can do part of the way, and EIB bonds are nothing else than Euro bonds, by the way, because they are bonds issued by the EU institution and applied to investment, but we're limited. Project bonds issued by private sector with the support of the budget and the bank could do another part of the way, also attracting of the private sector. But then is there room for Eurobonds stricto sensu? Let me just remind you here that, surprisingly, I don't think Mr. Notenboom mentioned it, but there was, between the late 70s and the early 80s, something called the new community instrument. or facilité ortholique, NIC in French. These were Eurobonds, genuine Eurobonds. That was the Commission going on the market to borrow. They passed the money to EIB to invest alongside their own loans in the sectors of infrastructure and SMEs at the time. Okay, this went on for a while. I think there were 4 tranches, up to 6 billion at the time, quite a substantial amount. It was then stopped because there was no need for them. The EIB was quite capable to do the trick on its own. It did not have the capital constraint that it has today, and the market demand was not such that it needed to go on. But today, of course, the situation is different. And we believe that this problem of growth of EIB lending that cannot be sustained at the level we have reached during the crisis, and mind you, we were at about 80 billion of loans. This is equal to EU budget without the CAP. Huh? So it's quite a big amount of money, but we could not sustain that level. So the risk is that we have to come down in terms of volume. Here is where Eurobonds could be useful, because the Commission could go on the market with the name of the Union to raise the resources, but as I said earlier on, maybe limiting the use to investment through the EIB, so that there's no criticism possible from member states that there is a commitment taken on future budgets. So we believe the issuing role should be with the Commission, not with the bank. You cannot mix 2 issuing programs in the same front office of the EIB. This was the same problem with the EFSF. You would mix up everything on the market, so it needs to be a different name, and the Commission could be carrying the EU name on the market for the issuance, but the EIB could very well, and should, I think, be the implementation agency, investing alongside criteria and eligibility defined by Parliament and Council, and of course, what sector, what projects. And I think this is essentially the system that could be very helpful at the moment. Just one caveat is the market absorption capacity. We have to be careful that very often, and particularly in the infrastructure sector, it is not the financial resources that is a constraint to the investment, but all other aspects, administrative aspects, regulatory aspects, cross-border agreements and all the rest, which permitting for environment, all these things are creating often more difficulties than the financial resources. So we need to be clear about the absorption capacity. Let me conclude briefly. First, I remind of the very, very important difference between the 3 categories of potential Eurobonds or bonds, project bonds, Barroso bonds, Eurobonds à la Delors or Eurobonds à la Juncker, different objectives, different issuers. If that is clear, then the second reasoning is, let's go for economically viable projects that promote growth. Let's finance them if the market's ready to absorb for more with the EIB, which is the first issuer of Eurobonds, then with the blending of grants and loans in the new financial instruments, innovative financial instruments for risk-bearing problems, then potentially Eurobonds stricto sensu for volume reasons, and that will complete possibly the armory necessary. Cooperation with the Commission, between Commission and EIB is absolutely paramount here, because otherwise it won't work. Cooperation with long-term investors in the banking sector on the markets also very important, because we cannot do it alone. We need to attract the others. And accountability to the Parliament is the last word.
Okay, thank you for 2 very, very interesting interventions. Now I see that almost the whole group is wanting to come in. The first one is Mr. Kreutzmann.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, we've heard 2 presentations which have nothing to do with each other. What the EIB said wasn't problematic. You can finance via the EIB. There are various possibilities. The investment can pay for itself, for example, in the case of certain networks which get revenue, and if you have a AAA bond, that's not problematic on the market. But what we have to discuss is Professor Grau's presentation, and that's where the major problems lie. For years, the states which have problems have profited from low interest rates when they have issued bonds using the European currency. And then the debtors noted that things had gone too far and interest rates went up because people weren't confident they would get their money back. Now, if you have different structures in the countries, if you take Greece, you can retire there at 59 with a state pension. Other countries have entirely different structures. And this means that you don't have a uniform financial and tax policy. So you can discuss your Eurobonds once we've overcome the financial crisis, but at the moment, what we'd be talking about would be a transfer. There are AAA Euro bonds, and some would profit. Now, if we are a community of solidarity and want to help out member states who are in a situation of financial crisis, we could do things more simply, i.e. taking on the debt and helping them in various ways, interest rate assistance, help from European funds, help to generate growth and increase revenue, to reduce the budget deficit, get in greater revenue from taxation. I mean, the countries which do have problems do need some time to overcome the problems. I don't know if we're asking the right questions. Now, your 60-40 split means that other countries take on debt. And you did mention the issue of moral hazard as the argument speaking against this system. There'd be no influence on the financial and budgetary policy of the other countries, and we would have what we have in Germany, a sort of offsetting between the Bundesländer. The stronger ones fund the weaker ones. We'd see this being developed on European level. There'd be stronger member states who would become liable for the debts of others. And I don't know whether member states are prepared to do this. So it only makes sense discussing Eurobonds with regard to what the EIB wants to do. That isn't so problematic. I mean, if you have AAA bonds on the market, then there are lower interest rates to be paid, which is helpful. But otherwise, you have to discuss how you help countries get out of the situation in which they're in. If they're in a very difficult situation and have to pay very high interest rates, but at the end of the day, it will, well, I mean, we can't have private creditors and bankers getting in higher interest rates and others suffering. It'll only work if the risk is justified. The risk of losing capital is offset by higher rates.
Mr. Kreuzmann. Professor de Grauwe.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your remarks. I will talk in English, but I understood you perfectly. I would like to make an introductory point about moral hazard. I have stressed the need to take care of moral hazard in any design of the Eurobond. Right? It's very important, and especially in Germany, there are strong concerns about this. But at the same time, I would like to stress the following point. That is that moral hazard risk has been excessively stressed. The reason why we have this crisis today has almost nothing to do with moral hazard. But for some reason, especially in the northern part of Europe, the mindset is it's all moral hazard. It's banks, for example, when I talk about banks, banks have taken excessive risk because they were expecting to be bailed out by government. So that's the moral hazard problem, right? You have an implicit insurance. But think about it. I don't know any bank that has done that. Banks have done something very different. They have taken excessive risk because they have misperceived risk. They didn't know what the nature of the products was. But did they expect when they bought this that, oh, let's do it because governments will bail us out? Of course not. They didn't do that. Take governments now. I'm going to set Greece aside for a while. But take all the other governments of the Eurozone. Take Ireland, take Spain, even take Portugal. Do you think that they increased the debt and deficits because they expected Germany to bail them out? Of course not. They didn't do that. First of all, Ireland and Spain were doing better than Germany prior to the crisis. Right? They had low debts, surpluses. So if we had the tighter stability pact that now many people dream about, well, they would have been the only two countries that passed the test, and all the others, including Germany, would have failed the test of the new stringent stability pact. So this moral hazard thinking has been excessive and has led to wrong proposals to deal with the crisis. And then I come to my second point. The worst proposal that has been made is the proposal that has been decided in the October European Council to apply haircuts. Right? And to tell bondholders, because of moral hazard reasoning, if some government will get into trouble, you will also have to pay. But bondholders, who are they? Who are the bondholders? They want security. And then there you have the European Council telling them, all these thousands of bondholders, we take away the security for you. So what do these bondholders do? They sell. Should we be surprised that we are in trouble now? No. It is a crisis that has been created by the decision of the European Council, forced by some countries to go in that direction. So I'm saying, stop doing this, right? It's destructive. It is extremely destructive. It is really creating the path to endemic instability in the Eurozone. And my proposal would be, take away all these bail-in proposals. Get rid of them. That's not the way we should deal with the problem. And so I'm sorry to say that this has been one of the reasons why we now have such an intense crisis. So we should deal with it in a different way. And the Eurobond proposal is one that tries to deal with it. It tries to deal, I mean, I'm not saying that moral hazard is to be neglected. It has to be neglected. It has to be taken care of precisely because it's, from the perception point of view, so important in some countries. And that's the design that I propose there tries to deal with this, right? By making sure that the guys who have too much debt will pay a higher price. At the same time, you make sure that those who behave well pay a low price. But we have to move into a direction where there is a minimum of solidarity. I mean, of course, we have to be willing to help each other out and trust each other and not always think that if Ireland is in trouble or if some other country is in trouble, it's their own fault, they should be punished. That's not the way we can save the Eurozone.
Thank you. And now we'll have the European Investment Bank view on this. Mr. Krenko? Okay, you're fine. Okay, then we'll move on to some more comments and questions. Let's take a few at the same time. First, Sylvie Goulart, and then Jan Mulder.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur de Grove, pour cette défense.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Grove, for making such an impassioned case. You're picking up our intuition that this is an issue we do need to address. I'm familiar with the terms of the debate in Germany. It's somewhat amusing to see that the two key expressions in the debate there are a union of transfers
der europäischen Integration. Also ich verstehe vollkommen die Gründe, warum die Deutschen damit ein Problem haben.
I understand why the Germans have a problem with this. It's been in existence since 1957, but it's more complicated than you might think. The other issue is financial balance. Financial balance. The problem is that the Germans see the EU as the Bundesländer see their Bund, see the federal Germany. Not one single person in Germany or in other countries knows exactly what this financial balance really is, what the balance is. So you can't start with an argument like that. So having said that, I've got two very clear questions. When you say that you're proposing a system where we have a differentiated interest rate, I'm a rapporteur on the economic governance package, and I looked at Eurobonds in this, knowing that there was a potential for a difficult debate on this, because I think that it's really unacceptable that the discussion can only be held outside the European Parliament. We've got to also hear from our colleagues that come from other countries where they have got concerns and justified concerns, and we should not allow the system to create some type of incitement for people to behave badly. And if we look at the last years, we'll see that the problem comes from the fact that the markets have not actually taken on board the realities and the different structural policies in different countries of the Union. So I'm interested if you can maybe go a bit further on that with your question of the differential on interest rates. And Mr. I wanted to talk to you about the private investors. When you talked about private investors, is this private banks, or would you also include the very interesting approach which we've seen with the Caisse de dépôt and the German savings funds? Are you talking about the private sector, or are you really talking about a sector which is really a para-public sector? Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie. Jan Mahler.
Thank you. Both were very interesting introductions to the subject. First of all, I have a simple question, I hope, to Professor de Grauwe. If you talk about the Barroso bonds or the Juncker bonds or whatever bonds you have, what is possible under the present treaty? Because I have somewhere in mind, present treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, do we have to change the treaties to enter into various bonds, or is everything possible? Because I have somewhere in my mind that the European Union is not allowed to make debts. So that is the first question. The second question, to Mr. de Kraaienkoer. That the Commission, yeah, as far as I know it, but that's why we have always a positive balance in the budget for the last, as long as the European Union existed. Second question is to Mr. de Kraaienkoer. At the moment, certain budget lines in the European budget are already used as a guarantee for the European Investment Bank. And that exists for, I think, about 10 years or so. What has been the experience with the particular budget lines, and what has been the multiplication effect in general?
Thank you, Jan. Now over to the panel. We could start with Mr. Kraaienkoer.
Thank you very much. À Madame Goulard, je répondrai que...
To Ms. Goulard, may I say that both points apply. When I talk about the private sector and the knock-on effect on the financial sphere, I'm talking about public bankers, KBW and the Italian Deposit Bank. You know, there's a long-term investors club, and we're very active there. Inframed started out there, for example. These projects are very much part of this catalytic effect on other investors that I was mentioning. But it's just as true, and particularly in the case of project bonds, I'm sure, that you need the real private sector in. We're talking here about pension funds or insurance companies who are the major players in the market with huge available liquidity. They're looking for long-term investments. They need long-term investments with an adequate credit rating attached to them. And since the crisis, they've lost their investment capacity because the monoline insurers in particular, who were carrying out this task in the past, have vanished from the market following the sort of investments they made, which were not as well-founded as those we would wish for. To Mr. Mulder, may I say that the treaty would seem to allow the Commission to take out loans for the simple reason that the Commission already, quite regularly, does take out loans to pursue a wide range of objectives, to provide assistance for balance of payments, assistance outside the EU, for example, and the operation in Greece, for example. The Commission had to take out a loan of the 60 billion euro was borrowed by the Commission on behalf of the Union. So, strictly speaking, this does not imply any violation of the treaty. Mr. Mulder, yeah, the difference is that that's within the budget. That's the difference between 1.24% and the current figure.
But that doesn't mean that you can borrow and that you can use your budget as the counterpart for your borrowing. That is what's happening. And that's what the EFSM is doing. EFSM is taking billions euro on the market, and the guarantee is the budget. But it is something different than to make it and to make a deficit.
And
I'm sorry to.
No, it's Mr. Alvarez is coming in. Group debate again.
No, I just wanted to answer your second question about the guarantee. There is indeed a guarantee of the EU budget for the part of the EIB operations outside the Union. This is the so-called external mandate, which is being revised at this very moment by your Parliament. I'm not sure what your question is about this. It's a specific system that's in place to provide for a cover of the political risk of our activities outside the Union, because we're not equipped to take such political risk. The results are on all the reports that are on the table of Parliament at the moment for their decision. In terms of results, they are, I believe, excellent, both on the impact of the operation to support external policies and in terms of losses to be covered by the guarantee fund. The history is that the losses have been zilch, zero. Oh.
Thank you. Professor de Grauw.
Yeah, I think I'd like to respond to a question that you raised about differential rates, right, within the scheme. Yeah. This would basically be a redistributive scheme, right, whereby the bonds, of course, would be issued joint.
We can show it again, maybe, so that, that
yeah,
but there are some people who were not there and they have not seen the proposal of Mr. de Grauw, and then maybe in the next group they shall say, no, we don't pay more, we want them to pay more, when he is showing that you pay less, okay? I mean, that's important. So maybe we can show it, because liquidity, the liquidity advantages is not in his, it's a pessimistic proposal what he's doing, but nevertheless it's...
But let's see if the technique
is it doing something?
Yeah,
there it is.
Yeah, so when you look at this again, so you have the two blue lines, right? This would be the interest payments on the left by the AAA country and on the right by the lower weighted country, not lower rating, lower weighted country. And then the dotted line is the average. That would basically be the interest rate that the euro bond would carry in the market, right? And as a result, you would have as internally a redistribution, basically. The less well, with the countries with the low rate, they would in fact redistribute part to the other country, to the AAA country, so as to keep the borrowing cost of the AAA country at the level it had in the market.
The issuance is common. The interest rate not, so that you have the advantage of the liquidity. Huh? Because you do it in a common issuance.
The common issue, that's the market rate. Yeah. The market rate is the... And then internally you have a kind of redistributive scheme, right?
Different rates.
Which of course will,
for Germany, though,
could change over time. If some of these low-rated countries improve, then there would have to be less redistribution. And that's to deal with with the problem that some countries see today, but we are going to lose. I mean, the AAA country doesn't want to step into this because it's likely, or it's perceived to lose in this joint bond issue, because it's, in a way you could put it this way, its reputation will be polluted by the lack of reputation of the other country, right? And so that tries to take care of this.
Thank you. And now, actually, we have a final question for Mr. Alvaro.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Herzlichen Dank auch für die vorangegangenen.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to also thank you for the 2 presentations. Just a very brief comment I've got to make. Liberals are well known for not wanting to actually oblige people to do things, and I think that we would really have hoped to have a financial balance in the EU for some time. But the structural funds are nothing other than transferring funds from one part of the country of the EU to others to ensure that the Union has a very similar level across the board. So I think in basis, even though we call this as the financial balance, or this is what we're trying to achieve, I think we already have this, had this for some time. But I don't think we should be concerned about this. There are other frameworks, conditions which are difficult. When we look at the situation throughout the board, we have 35-hour week in France. We've got low pension ages in Greece. If we have the falling building industry, construction industry in Spain, and that's why we have difficulties. Let me just go back to what Mr. Mulder said about state debt. This is something which doesn't concern me, and we've talked about this a number of times in the group, and I think it's still something which has got to be understood in this discussion, because if we issue Eurobonds, as Jan Mulder has said himself, what I wanted to say was that outside the EU budget, this is going to be outside the EU budget, and the creation of a deficit, a possible deficit, if the interest rate level increases or the repayments of the creditors is higher than what was initially planned, then you're going to have a problem with this gap. There's going to be a gap that has to be filled, and where's the money going to come from? And so the question that I have is whether, even though in the treaties it says something quite different, would it be that through Eurobonds, theoretically, we would create the opportunity for the EU to be in a policy, in a situation where we'd have a debt? That's a concern that we have, and a concern that we have got to look at, because we haven't got any possibility for debt in the EU. Our budget cannot be in debt, and we have got the same type of situation as in member states. And then finally, a question again on, we're talking about Eurobonds, about them being the only possibility of public financing. At least they're seen as the most important source of public financing. Other alternatives, I think, are not really part of the discussion. That's a shame. I'd like to know what you think as experts in this area. If we have got to go back, if we went back to the inception of the EU and we looked only at national contributions, which have gone down over years, let's say for 99% came from national budgets and 1% from penalties and whatever. So would we have full contributions from member states? Because the responsibility of the EU is based on the accumulation of finances. And that's been discussed in member states as well, that the communes, for example, get money that they can actually manage themselves, that they can use themselves. At the same time, if they have good financial management, they can save and then carry that over to the next year. So they will have surpluses for following years. Now, is that economically feasible as an argument for the EU? Would it be possible for the EU, or are there too many traps? Are there too many areas where you could argue to me that this is not the type of economic model we could think of or we could use? Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. And now over to the panel and your actually final remarks at the same time, and comments and answers to Mr. Alvaro's questions. Professor de Grauwe.
Well, on these 2 last points, it seems to me that if we want to move towards a more political union, at some point we will have to accept that the European executive also has debt, right? And if it has own resources and capacity to tax, then it can afford to have debt. But this fear that I see from some places where we say, well, European institutions should not have that, right? I mean, it's like saying we don't want a European executive that comes close to European government. Every government that has taxing power also has the capacity to issue debt and should issue debt. There is nothing bad with issuing debt, but we have been conditioned too much in Europe today to think that any form of government debt is devilish and should not be allowed, and certainly not at the European level. I think we should set these ideas aside if we take it seriously that we want to move into more political union.
Thank you. And now, Mr. De Crèvecoeur.
Small then.
Thank you. Well, I think that it's to our mind as bankers, of course, incurring debt is only to be considered in front of what you do with the money. If the money is invested in good and viable projects, which we've been doing for 60 years, I think you are simply making a return on it and growing. Actually, the only potential alternative I would offer, and à titre strictement personnel, is that if you think better, of course, the Union could simply take a share in EIB capital, in which case the result will be precisely the same, and there will be no debt incurred.
Thank you. Now let's give a very big applause to our two panelists for their contributions. Friends, we've had a very interesting seminar. It's time to wrap up. We had some Juncker bonds, Barroso bonds, and Delors bonds, and now Mr. Verhofstadt is going to launch the Verhofstadt bonds.
That's all the other bonds together.
So the final remarks by our
my final remark is very short, because the last proposal by Mr. Crèvecoeur means that the European Union shall become capitalists, real capitalists on the market, and why not? But I think we had a very interesting afternoon with two important panels, and certainly with the need to go further with our paper. So what we need now is in the SURE committee that we push our paper forward as the, what I should say, main philosophy behind the document. And it's a work that we have to do in the next weeks, because normally the SURE committee has to come forward April, May, in any case, before the Commission comes with proposals, because if we do it afterwards, that has no sense naturally. And then secondly, we are talking a long time this afternoon about a transfer union. Sylvie has used this word, solidarity and so on. But today the reality is a little bit different. The reality is that the EFSM is now working, and that the EFSM has taken 5 billion euro on board, EFSM, at an interest rate of 2.5%, and has given that to Ireland at an interest rate of 5.5%. And that we have an own resources that we have created, because I can tell you that on this 5 billion, every year there is 150 million euro gain for the European budget. That is what we are doing for the moment. So we are becoming capitalist, really, banking sector here. So to tell you that I think that this whole discussion, starting with the debt crisis in Greece, started in a wrong way, because we have given the impression that we should transfer money, and in reality it's money coming from these countries to the countries who are organizing the issuance. That's what's happening for the moment, and 3% is not so bad, so maybe there are certain candidates here to manage that in the future. But the second consequence of all this was even worse, that it has created, I think, a Eurosceptic feeling in a number of circles in the European Union, in saying, yeah, and it has also created enormous pressure on the euro itself, because a club is a club. If you say to one of the members of the club, oh, no, that's a bad guy, so everything is is jumping on the bad guy. If the members of the club don't believe in one of the members, how should the financial markets believe in one of the members of the club? So I think that's an important lesson. It was a year of crisis, 2010, and maybe a huge percentage of that crisis has been caused by the politicians themselves, and not by the members. And maybe what we have to do now is to do the opposite in 2010, to make from this year a year of action, and not a year of crisis. So thank you very much for your long presence today, this morning and this afternoon. Thank you. And we see each other on the New Year's reception this evening. Thank you.